It all started with something as minor as crossing the street. A black man, casually jaywalking, caught the attention of two police officers. They didn't know his name, they didn't care about his story. All they saw was someone to target. But here's the twist, this wasn't just any man. He wasn't some random pedestrian who'd quietly accept their authority. He was someone with power, someone whose identity would turn this routine arrest into a catastrophic mistake. A cage built to humiliate would soon become a trap, not for him, but for the officers themselves. It was an unbearably hot afternoon. The kind of day where the heat clung to your skin and even the faintest breeze felt like a blessing. Marcus Williams, a sharply dressed man with an air of calm confidence, decided to take a shortcut across an empty street. No cars, no traffic, just a quiet road baking in the sun. Enter Sergeant Brooks and Officer Taylor. Brooks, a seasoned cop with an ego that towered over the city skyline, was always on the lookout for moments to assert his authority. His rookie partner, Officer Taylor, trailed behind, silently observing, his growing unease hidden behind a practiced expression. The patrol car screeched to a halt. Brooks stepped out, his imposing frame radiating arrogance, while Taylor hesitated, unsure of what was about to unfold. "Hey! You think crosswalks don't apply to you?" Brooks barked, his voice loud enough to draw attention, though there was no one around to hear. Marcus turned, meeting their eyes with steady composure. "It's an empty street." "I wasn't harming anyone," he replied calmly. But calm wasn't what Brooks wanted. He wanted submission. And what happened next would be a calculated attempt to humiliate Marcus, a decision that would backfire in ways they could never imagine. The situation escalated quickly. Sergeant Brooks, towering over Marcus, jabbed a finger in his direction. "You think you're above the law, huh? Crossing a street wherever you feel like it?" His voice was loud, his tone dripping with aggression, as if Marcus had committed a heinous crime. Marcus, standing firm but composed, replied, "With all due respect, officer, I crossed an empty street. Don't you think this reaction is a bit much?" His words were steady, his gaze unflinching, but this only seemed to fuel Brooks' anger. "Oh, now you're questioning me? You want to play smart?" Brooks sneered, stepping closer. "You broke the law. And now you're going to deal with the consequences." Before Marcus could respond, Brooks motioned to Taylor. "Cuff him." Taylor hesitated, his hand hovering near the cuffs. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. This wasn't what he had signed up for. But under Brooks' stern glare, Taylor reluctantly complied. Marcus offered no resistance as the cuffs clicked into place. His calm demeanor was unnerving, almost as if he knew something they didn't. Back at the precinct, Brooks wasn't done. Instead of processing Marcus inside, he led him to a grimy, rusted cage in the back lot, an outdoor holding cell rarely used and intentionally humiliating. The metal bars were streaked with years of neglect, and the ground was littered with dirt and cigarette butts. This wasn't just punishment, it was a spectacle. Brooks shoved Marcus inside and slammed the door shut. "Enjoy your stay," he said with a smirk, walking away without a second glance. Taylor lingered nearby, his discomfort evident. He glanced at Marcus, who remained calm even in the degrading environment. Taylor's unease grew, something about this didn't sit right with him. Unbeknownst to the officers, a small group of bystanders had gathered outside the precinct. Phones in hand, they recorded every second of the encounter. Within minutes, videos of Marcus' arrest and confinement hit social media. The footage spread like wildfire. Comments flooded in outrage, disbelief, and demands for justice. What had started as a petty arrest was quickly becoming a national scandal, and neither Brooks nor Taylor had any idea of the storm heading their way. Within hours, the video of Marcus' arrest began circulating online. The footage, raw and unfiltered, captured every moment of the encounter, from Brooks' aggressive accusations to Marcus being shoved into the grimy cage. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #PoliceAbuse surged to the top of trending topics, drawing millions of views. "This is outrageous," one post read, accompanied by a snippet of the video. Another user wrote, "How can something like this still happen? He crossed the street and they humiliated him like this?" Celebrities, activists, and even politicians began weighing in. Advocacy groups called for immediate action, and public anger spread like wildfire. By nightfall, news outlets were running the story on a loop. Anchors dissected the footage, legal analysts condemned the officer's behavior, and community leaders demanded accountability. Outside the precinct, a crowd of protesters began to form, holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "End Police Abuse." The chants grew louder with each passing hour, echoing through the streets. Inside the precinct, chaos reigned. Phones rang nonstop as reporters, advocacy groups, and even city officials called demanding answers. The front desk officer looked frazzled, juggling media inquiries and irate citizens. In the chief's office, tensions were even higher. Chief Reynolds paced back and forth, phone in hand, his voice barely restrained as he berated Brooks and Taylor. "What the hell were you thinking, Brooks? A jaywalking arrest? And putting him in that cage? Are you out of your mind?" Brooks sat with his arms crossed, his expression defiant. "He was disrespectful, Chief. I was doing my job." "Your job," the chief shot back, slamming his hand on the desk. "Your job isn't to turn this department into a national disgrace. Do you have any idea the mess you've created?" Protesters outside, reporters breathing down our necks, City Hall calling for an inquiry, and it's all because you couldn't let a man cross the damn street. Officer Taylor, sitting quietly in the corner, glanced between the two. His guilt was palpable. He hadn't spoken up when it mattered, and now it was too late. Brooks, however, shrugged, his arrogance unwavering. "This'll blow over," he said dismissively. "The media will move on to something else in a few days. It's just noise." But Brooks underestimated the power of public outrage. Outside, the protest had swelled to hundreds. People of all ages and backgrounds chanted for justice. News vans lined the streets, their cameras capturing every moment. And the hashtags didn't just trend, they sparked a movement. Advocacy groups announced plans for rallies, petitions demanding Brooks' suspension gained tens of thousands of signatures, and legal experts began dissecting the footage, raising questions about the legality of Marcus' arrest. What Brooks had dismissed as noise was quickly evolving into a reckoning. The pressure was mounting, not just on him but on the entire precinct. And amidst it all, Marcus remained silent, watching as the world fought for him in a way Brooks never anticipated. This wasn't going to blow over. It was only the beginning. The morning after the protests, the precinct was in disarray. Phones continued to ring incessantly, the angry chants of protesters echoed from outside, and inside, tension gripped the air. Sergeant Brooks sat at his desk, still exuding his trademark arrogance, brushing off the chaos around him. Officer Taylor, however, sat in silence, his unease growing with every passing moment. Suddenly, the chatter in the room came to a halt as the precinct doors swung open. All heads turned. In walked Marcus, but this time, he was unrecognizable. Gone was the man in casual clothes from the day before. He was now dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, his calm but commanding presence instantly silencing the room. Brooks leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. "What's this guy doing back here?" he muttered. Marcus walked straight past the front desk, his gaze unwavering, until he reached the center of the room. He carefully pulled out a sleek leather folder from his briefcase and held it up for everyone to see. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm a federal investigator with the Department of Human Rights." The room froze. Brooks's smirk vanished as Marcus flipped open the folder to reveal his credentials. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. "Yesterday, I was unlawfully detained and subjected to humiliation by members of this precinct. Today, I'm here in an official capacity to present my findings on the numerous legal and ethical violations committed under your watch." The silence was deafening. Brooks, his face flushing red, scoffed and crossed his arms. "Oh, come on," he barked. "You were jaywalking. What violations are you talking about?" Marcus turned to him, unshaken. "Let me remind you, Sergeant Brooks, that jaywalking is a minor infraction that does not warrant physical aggression, arrest, or public humiliation. The use of that cage, a facility with no documented approval, violates both state and federal regulations concerning the treatment of detainees. Furthermore, your actions yesterday constitute racial profiling and abuse of power. All of this has been documented in my report, which will be submitted to the Federal Oversight Committee." Brooks opened his mouth to retort, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "I suggest you think carefully before speaking again, Sergeant. Your words might serve to further incriminate you." The weight of Marcus's words hung heavy in the air. Brooks's confidence faltered, but he tried to recover. "You think you can walk in here and intimidate us with a badge? This is all a misunderstanding." Marcus stepped closer, his tone unwavering. "The only misunderstanding here is your belief that your authority places you above the law. Let me assure you, Sergeant, it does not. And I will ensure that every single violation from yesterday is addressed." Officer Taylor sat silently, his guilt etched across his face. His eyes met Marcus's briefly, and in that moment, the rookie officer's internal conflict was clear. He had remained complicit in the abuse, and the weight of his inaction was now crushing him. Marcus took one final look around the room, his gaze lingering on Brooks. "Justice isn't optional," he said before turning to leave. The precinct remained silent as the sound of his footsteps echoed. For the first time, Brooks's arrogance had been shattered. And for everyone watching, it was clear, Marcus had not only reclaimed his power but had also set the stage for accountability in the most impactful way possible. The following week, the precinct was no longer the fortress of authority it once claimed to be. Instead, it had become the epicenter of a scandal rocking the community. News vans camped outside, protesters waved signs day and night, and reporters hounded officers for statements. Inside, the atmosphere was even tenser. As the precinct scrambled to contain the fallout, the federal oversight team arrived unannounced. Dressed in sharp suits and carrying stacks of documents, they marched into the precinct like a storm. Marcus led the group, his presence commanding and deliberate. Behind him trailed two senior federal investigators, ready to conduct on-site interviews and audits. The officers of the precinct, once so confident in their untouchable status, watched in silence as Marcus and his team set up in the conference room. The walls, once adorned with plaques of supposed achievements, now felt like hollow reminders of a crumbling reputation. Moments later, Marcus convened a meeting. The room filled with officers, including Brooks and Taylor. The tension was palpable as Marcus stood at the head of the table, a thick report in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice calm but authoritative, "this report outlines the findings of our investigation into this precinct's practices. What began as an isolated incident has revealed deeper, systemic issues." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The room was silent, save for the faint scribbling of one of the federal investigators taking notes. Marcus opened the report and began listing the violations. First, the illegal use of the holding cage as a means of public humiliation. Second, a documented pattern of racial profiling in detainments and arrests. Third, a clear failure of leadership to address complaints regarding excessive force. Brooks, seated with arms crossed, couldn't hide his annoyance. "This is a witch hunt," he muttered under his breath. Marcus looked directly at him. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, his tone sharper now, "your actions were not just violations of policy, they were a violation of the trust that the community places in law enforcement. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending a legal investigation into your conduct." Brooks's jaw tightened. "You can't do this," he spat. "Oh, but I can," Marcus replied firmly. "And so can the Federal Oversight Committee, who will ensure you face the legal consequences of your actions." The room remained quiet as Brooks's anger turned into humiliation. His usual air of arrogance was gone, replaced by the weight of his downfall. Marcus turned to the rest of the officers. This is not just about one individual. This is about a culture that has been allowed to fester. Change is not optional, it starts today. At that moment, Officer Taylor stood up, visibly shaken. All eyes turned to him as he took a deep breath. I need to say something, he stammered. Marcus nodded, giving him the floor. Taylor's voice cracked as he began. I was there that day, and I didn't do anything to stop what happened. I saw how wrong it was, but I stayed silent. I let my fear of standing up to my superior cloud my judgment. He turned to Marcus, his eyes filled with remorse. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. None of it was right. The room was stunned. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by the faint sound of chants from the protesters outside. Marcus looked at Taylor, his expression softening slightly. Officer Taylor, accountability isn't just about admitting wrongdoing, it's about ensuring it doesn't happen again. If you truly want to make amends, start by being part of the solution. Taylor nodded, his resolve evident. I will, he said firmly. The climax of the story was not just Brooks's downfall, but also the glimmer of hope in Taylor's redemption. As Marcus and the federal team finalized their actions, the precinct's future hung in the balance. Outside, the protesters began to cheer as news broke that justice was finally being served. Marcus stepped out of the precinct and looked at the crowd. Though there was still much work to be done, this moment was a turning point, a small but significant victory in the fight for justice and systemic change. The doors of the precinct opened, and Marcus stepped outside into a sea of flashing cameras and cheering protesters. His presence was calm but commanding, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded over the past few days. He paused for a moment, letting the noise die down before stepping up to the hastily assembled podium. Good evening, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. This isn't just about me. This is about something far bigger, something that affects communities across this nation. What happened here is a symptom of a larger issue, systemic abuse of power and the persistent shadow of racism. The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. Protesters holding signs like Justice for All and End Police Abuse nodded in agreement. Marcus's calm demeanor made his words hit even harder. As a federal investigator, my job is to hold institutions accountable. But accountability shouldn't begin and end with investigations. It's a responsibility we all share, to call out injustice wherever we see it and to demand better from those who are supposed to serve and protect us. Marcus scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on the younger faces, some of whom had been recording the speech on their phones. To the younger generation, he continued, never underestimate the power of your voice. The videos you took, the hashtags you shared, the protests you organized, they forced the world to pay attention. Change starts with moments like this. The crowd erupted into applause, chants of Marcus. Marcus, filling the air. Reporters jotted down every word, their microphones and cameras pointed at the man who had become an unexpected hero. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, Sergeant Brooks packed his belongings in a cardboard box, his expression a mixture of anger and humiliation. He had become a symbol of everything wrong with outdated policing practices, a cautionary tale for those who believed they were untouchable. Officer Taylor, however, stood near the back of the crowd, watching Marcus with a newfound sense of purpose. For him, this wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Taylor's apology and willingness to change had sparked something within him, a drive to be part of a better system. As Marcus stepped away from the podium, reporters shouted questions, but he didn't linger. This wasn't about personal glory, it was about setting an example. As he walked away, the chants of the crowd grew louder, and social media began flooding with clips of his speech. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #AccountabilityNow trended worldwide, and Marcus was hailed as a hero. But for him, the real victory was in the message: equality, accountability, and justice are non-negotiable. The battle was far from over, but today marked a step forward, a reminder that change, though slow, is always possible. As Marcus walked away from the crowd, his thoughts turned inward. The chaos, the protests, the injustice, it had all led to this moment, but for him, it was never just about one incident. It was about the countless others who faced the same challenges, the same abuse, every single day. This wasn't just about me, Marcus said quietly, looking out over the crowd. It's about everyone who faces injustice daily. It's about the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, and sisters who get caught in a system that doesn't listen to them. The real fight is bigger than any one person, it's for everyone who's been silenced. He paused, taking a breath. But we have power. We have the power to challenge racism, to fight against abuse, and to demand systemic reform. It's up to all of us to make sure this doesn't happen again. And it starts with standing up, whether it's at a protest, speaking out in a conversation, or simply being aware of the injustice around us. Marcus turned to face the camera, his voice strong. Share this story if you believe in justice and accountability. Don't let it fade away. Comment below with your thoughts. What would you do if you saw this happening? The fight for justice is ongoing, and your voice matters. The screen faded to black, leaving behind the powerful message, change begins with you.